Welcome to the IAS. I'm Marcia Meskman. I'm the Director of the Institute of Advanced Studies. If you're joining us online, thank you very much for making your way here today for the virtual session. And if you are in the room, you will find that you are periodically visible when you ask questions. We are trying a new piece of technology today. I'd like to say it's an honor of our speaker, but it actually is just something that we are testing out on the off chance, but I suspect our speaker knows much more about this kind of technology than any of us in the room, which is also going to be very exciting to talk about later. For those of you who are new to the IAS, the Institute of Advanced Studies was set up just under 5 years ago. We are the university's main institute for developing international research collaborations. We have in our 4 and a bit years hosted over 300 fellows from some 36 countries in the world across all areas of research interest and disciplines in the university. And it is really a privilege through our various programs, our themes, our spotlight series, and our response-oriented open program to bring international fellows to the Institute to work with and collaborate with Loughborough University's researchers, and particularly to develop really interesting, cutting-edge, and often very much interdisciplinary projects. One of the things we have always been excited about, and when we established our residential fellowship program, and Cathy Pearl, our speaker today, is part of our residential program, one of the things we were very excited about was the fact that not only do we bring the most stellar researchers who are working in higher education to the Institute, but we bring stellar researchers who are practitioners, who are artists, who are writers, who are policymakers, potentially people working in politics, but also people working in industry as stellar researchers applying and using the research that they're working on with colleagues here in a variety of different ways. And we are really, really thrilled today to be welcoming Cathy to us, who has been working with colleagues Liz Stoko and Saul, who will be shortly introducing her, and working with communication studies in a way that is really dynamic, exciting, and will have some fantastic, fantastic outcomes. So I'm going to turn over now to have a formal invitation, but we're really delighted to be hosting this today. And colleagues who are online, if you note that you have a chat, but you will also have a Q&A function on your screen if you want to ask questions directly through the Q&A function, or if you want to have commentary and discussion through the chat, please feel free to use those. We can see all of those in the space live here in terms of the hybrid format, and we can enable conversation to emerge from those later. So without any further ado, introducing Cathy.
Hello and welcome to colleagues and friends around the world. Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. My name is Saul Albert, and I'm in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities here at Loughborough University. And it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce our IAS fellow, who is being hosted in communications and media by primarily myself and Liz Stoko, Cathy Pearl, who is as Marshall was saying, a stellar practitioner, researcher, and head of conversation design outreach when we first encountered Cathy, and now a conversation designer at Google. She's also author of Designing Voice User Interface, the O'Reilly book from 2016, and is one of the first people to originate, to use, to propagate the term conversation design, and has been immensely influential in sharing knowledge and encouraging practitioners from all fields of design and technology to begin working with voice interfaces and to start conceptualizing this entire field of design. So it's a huge privilege for us to be able to host Cathy. It's also just been so much fun. And we've had a wonderful couple of weeks, and we're looking forward to another couple of weeks, during which we've been trying to find crossing paths between conversation analysis, which is the scientific study of conversation, which is a thing that's Loughborough is rather well known for, and it's certainly something that anybody who's familiar with Liz Stoko's work, Google it if you're not, will be very excited about. And to try and find paths between conversation analysis and conversation design. And it's just been wonderful to host you here, Cathy. You've been such a generous interlocutor, and as somebody who's really created lots of pathways through and into conversation design. Just having you here for a couple of, for 4 weeks of focused work is just a really great opportunity for us all to learn a lot, and I'm hoping that that's what, or I'm sure that that's what you're going to be sharing with us all today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Saul. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm really, really excited to be here, and thanks to the Institute of Advanced Studies for hosting me here. So today I'm briefly going to talk a little bit about what conversation design is, what we do. I know there's some people here who already know that. There are probably some people online who are conversation designers who already know, but some people may not have heard the term, and I want to just make sure we're all on the same page there. Talk a little bit more about what I'm doing here, how did I get here, and finally share a little bit about what Saul, Liz, and I have been doing these last couple of weeks. What have we been talking about, and what are we hoping to do accomplish? So very briefly, a little bit about me. That's me when I was a young teenager. I was already a computer nerd way back in the day, and I'm holding a copy of this software program called Print Shop, which I was very excited about, which allowed you to print birthday cards and signs. But I was lucky to have a computer at a young age. And even back then, as a kid, I was interested in trying to have the computer talk back to me. And this is a transcript of a chatbot I wrote. In 1984, I resurrected it recently on a simulator. And basically, the user says hi, the bot says hi there, the user says how are you, fine if you like being you, which I don't. You can see it's not the greatest chatbot, it really reflected kind of where I was at as a teenager. I really liked Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Mars and the Paranoid Android, kind of talk like that. But I never dreamed as a kid, like this could actually be a career. There was no such thing as conversation design, anything like that. And I just find it kind of astonishing to be where I am now and actually be like, if I could tell my young self, like, guess what, you're gonna need to do this for real. So I studied cognitive science and computer science, and eventually I got a job at a company called Nuance Communications, which was the first company to create automated phone systems where you could actually speak to the computer rather than press 1 or whatever. Their first phone system was with a financial company called Charles Schwab, and you can call him a stockbook. So I learned a lot there about how to do voice user interface design. And then I worked at a variety of startups on multimodal conversational interfaces. And in the last 4 years, I've been working as a conversation designer at Google. So, what is conversation design? What do we actually do? So just as a starter, this is a real interaction I had with a conversational system. I removed the name to protect the innocent, but I asked, what's next on my calendar? It said, your next item is Cathy dentist at 2 p.m. That's pretty good. Then I said, how long will it take to get there? And it said, and it really said this, it depends on the details of the orbit you take to the Venus and Mars. Now, obviously this is a bug, but how do these bugs happen? Sometimes they're very technical bugs, but often they occur because a product or a company does not have a conversation designer. It is our job to try and prevent these types of things from happening and really make an effective and efficient way for you to communicate with computers. And that's what anyone who's ever used a conversational system has had a frustrating experience, I have no doubt, many. But our job is to really fix that and prevent that by really applying good design principles. It's not just with voice assistants. This is a chatbot I was chatting to once. We were talking about our plans. It was saying, thanks for sharing your plans with me. I asked it, well, what about you? What are your plans? It said, I'm making dinner, beef and lasagna. Yum. Oh, we're moving the owl. For those of you online, what we were talking about earlier is we have this thing called an owl, which is like a fancy smart speaker that has cameras and everything. So I'm now closer to it looks like an owl. That's why it's called. Anyway, I'm talking to it about its vegan lasagna. It says, I keep thinking I left the oven on. It's awfully early for dinner. Where are you? I'm in the cloud. Then how do you eat lasagna? There's no food in the cloud. Exactly. So this is another thing we often see is this, we sometimes call this hallucination on the part of the chatbot. It doesn't even have consistency within its own model. Does it eat food? Does it not eat food? It doesn't even know. And again, these are the kinds of things that conversation designers are always thinking about. What is going on underneath the surface? It's not just about those final sentences you might see or hear. Recently, I was reminded of this interesting experiment where this person, I'm going to get his name wrong, it's Gianluca Gemini. He's an artist. He asked 500 people to draw a bicycle. And only 25% of people actually managed to draw the right sort of mechanical parts of a bicycle. And what he did was he took the drawings, and he had a digital artist actually trying to create what the bike would look like in real life. But it just reminded me, it's like most people know how to ride a bicycle. They've been doing it a long time, but they don't necessarily know how it works. And conversation is similar, I think. It's like we all have been talking for a long, long time, and yet we have trouble maybe describing how do we talk? Why do we say this and not that? Sometimes we fall back on maybe the grammar rules you learned at school, like never put a preposition at the end of a sentence. We break that rule all the time in real conversation. And so conversation designers, like conversation analysts, we're thinking about how do people really talk? Why do they do it that way? And what can we learn from that? Okay, so what might we actually do on a day-to-day basis? Well, imagine a situation in which somebody wants to know when a business is open. We might ask a question like, what time is Olivia's open tomorrow? And it might say, tomorrow Olivia's will be open from 9 to 3. But what if we ask a different question? Is it open for lunch? Yes, Olivia's will open today at 11 and close at 3. So these are similar questions. You're asking about the business hours, but they merit different responses. You wouldn't want the exact same response because you're asking it a different way. Like the second one is a yes/no question. We should say, yes, it's open, no, it's not open. If you don't have a conversation designer thinking about this, what you often end up with is sort of the simplest solution, which is, oh, you've got the hours and the days of the business. You have an API. Let's just throw it out there and we'll start telling you what it is. So imagine if I said, what time is Olivia's open tomorrow? Olivia's is open Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. On Thursday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Friday from, like, that is a lot of information coming at you at one time. And you have to do a lot of cognitive load to really process all that. You have to do all that work yourself. So it's better, the voice assistant or the chatbot should do that for you. So again, just to demonstrate, there's a lot going on under the surface, even if you only hear a simple prompt in the end. So don't do that. Now, how did this whole thing start? So it started back in May of 2019. I was giving a talk at the annual Google Developers Conference, which is called Google I/O. And I was speaking about conversation designer with a colleague. And I didn't know Liz. I had recently read her book, Talk, The Science of Conversation, highly recommend. And little did she know, I actually mentioned something I had learned about in her book about question intonation, which is a myth of communication. We think that, oh, when you ask a question, we always have a rising intonation at the end, like, are you happy? But sometimes, many times when we ask a question, we actually have a falling intonation, like, did you have a good time yesterday? That's like down. So anyway, I had mentioned that in the talk. She didn't realize that I had gotten it from her book, but she was watching the talk and she tweeted about it. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, Liz Stoko was tweeting about my talk. So I replied, of course. And she reached out and said, hey, we should have a video chat. So we did. And then we got to talking and we thought, well, maybe we could collaborate sometime. And she encouraged me to apply for this grant at the IAS, and I did. And I was all set to come here in the summer of 2020, but that didn't happen. And then I was all set, I was going to come in 2021, and that didn't happen. But it has finally happened. I am here. I am so excited. It's been a wonderful experience to be here in Loughborough. And we've just been having, as Saul said, we've been having a really nice time just brainstorming, thinking through what we want to do. Because what we're doing is we're working on a book proposal. As Saul mentioned, like how can the field of conversation analysis be applied in a very practical way to conversation design and bring them together in a very workable way. And we've also been eating a lot of biscuits and tea cakes, and that's been awesome. Okay, so what are some of the things we've been learning and discussing as we've been together? So one of the things we have in common, oh yes.
I need to reshare the screen one second.
Uh-oh, okay. Hang on, everyone online. Small technical.
Oh no, I'll wait.
Yeah, okay. And should I turn the video off on this other? There's two of me, but I don't know if it matters.
No, you can minimize that.
That's okay. All right. So one of the things we certainly have in common is this idea of in the wild, and what we mean by that is looking at conversations, whether they're with humans or with voice assistants in the wild, that's where it's at. That's the best. Because one of the things I've been learning more about is when you're a conversation analyst and you're looking at data for artificial situations, like let's say you're training people to do something like have conversations in a work setting, or one of the interesting studies that I've seen that Liz shared with me is a study they did on mystery shoppers, where someone is pretending to have a problem, like they have a cat that needs injections, and they call the vet and pretend to be that real pet owner, but in fact they're not. And it turns out there are differences in the way that those people speak to, like, the veterinarian than a real person who has a real cat would speak. And similarly with conversation design, when we design a new feature or something, even if you've been a designer a long time and you're experienced, you will launch something out in the wild where people will say things that you did not expect. It is just going to happen. And if you don't know that and really accept that, you might just throw it out there and never touch it again. Whereas what you really want to do is expose it to a small number of people, see how they really talk to it, and then, you know, modify your design and make it work. We do, you know, usability studies, which are great. But usability studies are often in the lab where you're asking people to say, like, pretend you had an appointment or do things like that. And people just aren't going to speak exactly the same way as they would if they were really doing that thing. So we definitely have that in common. Data is key. Conversation analysts have lots of data of real people talking, and it is so valuable. As a conversation designer, I may not have access to important data, or I'm designing something new that we've never designed before. I don't have any data for that of a person talking to a voice assistant. What if we could take advantage of this wealth of data that conversation analysts have painstakingly looked at and transcribed? Surely some of that could inform what we do, and our design could be better from the beginning. Having said that, conversation analysis and conversation design are not identical. The way that someone speaks to a chatbot probably has a lot of similarities in the way they might speak to another human, but it's not identical. And so we're also talking a lot about that. Like, okay, what things from conversation analysis really make sense to bring into conversation design? What things maybe just don't really make sense? We're not trying to boil the ocean. We're not like, oh, everything in CA must be in CXD. It's more like, where are the key spots that will be super, super helpful? And basically in these talks with Liz and Saul, I just feel like CA plus CXD equals magic. Like, I'm really excited about bringing the two things together in a very practical, for me, being in the industry, practical. We wrote that on the board, practical is what we're trying to do. So a little bit more about the mystery shopper I mentioned. There was a study that Liz and Saul and a few other people did where they looked at people calling veterinarians and to try and see what were the different ways that people spoke in that way. So I'm going to play an actual audio transcription, and you can hear what this real call sounds like.
Good afternoon. Research you speak today to the house. I saw this puppy the other day. Just wondering how much it costs to get the job done, please. Of course, yeah. Let's have a look for you. What was the breed of the puppy that you had? Oh, it's just a crossbreed, collie cross. Oh, how old is it, did you say?
I'm going to pause it there. So what are some of the things they noticed here? So this is the mystery shopper. This person does not have a real dog that needs jabs. So you can see here a few things. First of all, they say, I got a puppy. Not most people, they call up and say, my puppy, my cat. Also, they started to say, maybe they were saying dog because they kind of forgot I have a puppy, not a dog. And also one of the things they noticed was the purpose of the call. The mystery shoppers often chose to ask about cost. How much would this procedure or that procedure cost? Whereas real people with pets, rarely, that was not the main purpose. It was almost always to make an appointment. So let's do one more example call. And again, this is someone calling the vet.
Good evening. Speaking, how can I help? How possible to make an appointment for my cat for a follow-up? He had an operation. What was the surname, sorry? And cat's name? Oh, yeah. Let's have a look.
So I'll pause there, but again, so this person said my cat. They also gave some extra information, like had an operation. And again, it's to make an appointment. I want to actually, while we have this transcription up on the screen, talk a little bit about that itself, because if you're a conversation analyst, you're very familiar with this. I don't have to explain anything. But if you're a conversation designer, you might be thinking, this is like a sample dialogue on steroids. Like this is like a gold mine. And you know, all this information that we don't normally see in the sample dialogues that conversation designers create. We've got interruptions, pauses, overlap, intonation, all these really interesting and important aspects of what is actually being said here. And that's, again, one of the things we're talking about, like what are the aspects in this detailed transcription that we wish we could have as sample dialogue as conversation designers. And I'm finding that, you know, really, really interesting. They also, so what I was saying before in this mystery shopping study, they were looking at the reasons for people calling. So it's a little hard to see the labels, but in blue, you've got the mystery shoppers, and in orange, you've got the real callers. And you can see that the blue is cost, 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 and then a thing about process. And the orange, the real callers, are appointment, 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 and some other reasons. So again, you might say, okay, fine. The difference is that they're each calling for a different reason, but so what? Well, that changes the way people are actually talking on these calls. And so if we're able to access what people are really saying in these situations, again, we can see the conversations, the design that we're creating with chatbots and voice assistants in the correct way to map to what people will really be talking about. So a little bit about what we've been discussing these last couple of weeks and what we're thinking about putting in the book, and then we'll have some time for questions. So the way we've been sort of talking about this is in this idea of a should a CUI, should a conversational user interface, should a CUI say hello? One of the myths of communication I've been learning about is this idea of building rapport. Like, I think people, like customer sales people, are told, like, well, you really need to build rapport with the people you're cold calling. When actually, maybe that's going to just really annoy someone. And really, you don't want to build rapport. You want to help them get done whatever it is they want to get done. We have a similar conversation when it comes to voice assistants and chatbots. We think, we want people to trust this chatbot. It's really important. How can we do that? Well, maybe we can ask them what's your favorite color, or maybe we can engage in some way. But again, maybe they just want to set a timer. Like, let's not, you know, go there. We're also in this category talking about where it's appropriate to do things. Like, we've all heard the, you know, please listen as the menu options have changed, and everyone's annoyed by that. Or you asked to take a survey, but you haven't even done anything yet. So we're looking at sequence ordering, and I'm learning these new words as we talk about design. Should a CUI interrupt? In the world of voice assistants or voice technology, we often talk about barge in. That's sort of our catch-all phrase for any time the user might interrupt the system. Back when I worked on phone systems, barge in was a thing. You could easily and commonly interrupt like a menu list and just say the thing you wanted. With voice assistants and smart speakers, we don't generally have this thing called barge in, other than, of course, saying the wake word all over again. And that's on purpose, because that's not the same. When you say, hey, whatever, set a timer, that's not the same as talking to someone on the phone. And so barge in isn't necessarily appropriate. There's other reasons too, about the microphones, more people in the room, all kinds of things like that. But what would it mean if we could interrupt our voice assistants? One of the things I'm learning about with conversation analysis is interruption means a lot of different things. There's true interruption where you really are interrupting someone and you want to take the floor, but there's also this concept of overlap, where if you're telling me a story, I'm not just sitting there like this. Hopefully, I'm helping you. I'm saying, oh, wow, cool, whatever. Imagine if that were happening when you talk to your voice assistant. If you just had a very, you know, generic idea of barge in, you're like, oh, the user's talking, I better stop and listen to what they're saying. With overlap, we don't want the voice assistant to stop and say, oh, I need to process what you're saying. We want that, that's just part of the active listener. So again, should a CUI interrupt? I don't know. Should a CUI finish your sentences? I'm sure you've all had that experience where you're talking to someone and they finish your sentence. And you've had the times when when it was maybe a friend and you're like, wow, we're so on the same page. We're really, you know, thinking the same way. They know me so well. And you've probably also had the case where, oh, they don't know me. Why are they telling me what they think I'm going to say? That's not appropriate. Should a CUI do something like this? maybe, maybe not, but think about, we've been talking about this idea of maybe moonshots, like stuff that's maybe further out. Would we ever want a case where maybe a person who has memory loss or memory issues, they could turn to their CUI and say like, hey, you know, I'm thinking of this word, I can't remember what it is, you know, can you help me? That might be useful. Or what if it's used as a bit of a memory holder, you know, like, oh, what was that place I went to last summer? I went to this cafe, had these nice little cheese toasties. Like, could it help with that? Or more importantly, would we want it to help with that? And one more I'll mention, should a CUI make Freudian slips? You know, there's this thing called self-initiated self-repair, another phrase I'm learning, where someone might be talking, and an example that Liz gave me is someone was talking and he said, oh, you know, when we were talking to those girls, those women, like he corrected himself and replaced girls with women. No one told him to do that, no one interrupted him, anything like that. Now, I don't think a CUI would ever do that because a CUI doesn't probably even realize it's making a mistake, but if a CUI does make a mistake, would people like it to acknowledge it? And it reminded me of a study I heard about where they took a robot. This was at the University College London and the University of Bristol. They created a robot called Bert to help people. It was a collaborative task to help people make an omelet. And in one case, Bert would do it flawlessly, no mistakes. In the next case, Bert would make a mistake, but not say anything about it. And in the last case, Bert would drop the egg and then be like, and the mouth would go down. Oh, I'm so sorry. And then they looked at the reaction of people, which robot did they like working with? And a lot of people preferred the third Bert that made the mistake and acknowledged it, even though it actually made the omelet task take a little longer. In this study, and it was only an experiment, they seemed to appreciate that the robot was able to do this. So I don't know, maybe it would be interesting to have a CUI who actually could realize like, I made a mistake, I'm so sorry. You know, would that build trust? Good question. So lastly, one of the things that this book will include is this idea of sort of a two-way glossary, because a lot of times we've found that we'll have a term that the other person maybe hasn't heard of, but maybe we have something similar. And it's important, if you're a conversation designer reading this book, you want to know what these terms mean. And if you're a conversation analyst reading this book, you want to know maybe how you can speak to someone in industry and speak in the language that they will understand. You know, these interesting terms, self-initiated, self-repair, which we might call just repair in the CXD world, or we might, the part where it says, no, the one by Patsy Cline, we might call it a one-step correction. So it's really interesting to see where we have similar terms, maybe where we don't have, like there may be a term in conversation analysis that we have no term in conversation design. So that's an interesting exploration as well. So at the end of the day, you know, we're going to have a book proposal, and then hopefully in the not too distant future, we will end up with a book. And that's it. I'm going to stop here and open it up for questions.